Poll says Trump is divisive, but he's got plenty of company, including the media. The most eye-popping figure in the latest Fox News poll is that 56% of those surveyed say President Trump is tearing the country apart. Another 33% say he is drawing the country together. Not surprisingly, there's a dramatic partisan split in those numbers. Some 68% of Republicans say the president is drawing the country together, while 93% of Democrats, and 59% of independents, say he is tearing the country apart. But I want to pose a deeper question: is this entirely Trump's fault, or is it also ours? Let's look at recent history. Barack Obama campaigned on changing the tone in Washington, and many supporters thought his election would usher in a new era of racial healing. He failed on both counts. George W. Bush explicitly ran as a uniter, not a divider. But after Iraq and Katrina, he was viewed as a very divisive president. Bill Clinton promoted the notion of third-way policies that rejected the brain-dead politics of both parties. He wound up getting impeached on a largely party-line vote. So if 4 straight presidents have found themselves at the center of a hyper-partisan divide, maybe it's not entirely their fault. Both parties, aided by gerrymandered districts, have moved further to the right and left, shrinking the number of moderates in Congress. The media have become increasingly partisan, as some outlets largely or completely cater to those who agree with their politics. Social media have become more polarized as well, as millions of people engage in shouting matches or unfriend each other. And the rise of independent advocacy groups, liberated by the Supreme Court, is fueled by a fundraising machine that often demonizes the other side. Now a case can be made that Trump, especially in recent weeks, has played to his base, the 36 to 40% that seem to support him no matter what. He has pushed a transgender ban for the military, ended Obama-era equal pay monitoring, threatened a government shutdown over his border wall, pardoned ex-Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and is considering ending the Dreamers program after a 6-month delay. Then again, it's no accident that Obama embraced gay marriage and said he would stop deporting the Dreamers' younger illegal immigrants brought here by their parents, when he was running for re-election in 2012. It's easy for Trump's detractors to work themselves into a frenzy over the notion that he is a uniquely polarizing president. But this has been going on in one form or another for 2 decades.
You think about, since President Trump announced his run, it has now taken an act of God to get President Trump off the front page and off of the top story of every major newscast and newspaper.
Right. Well, of course, he's not completely off the front page, since a lot of the media are critiquing his handling of the hurricane. But look, this is a great moment to just pause and say, for all the abuse that journalists take, for all the criticism, much of it well-deserved, not just from Trump, but from just about everybody, all sides, social media, you name it. What's happened in Houston and the surrounding area, as we have seen journalists brave very dangerous conditions, as you say, participate in rescues, work around the clock, some of the local journalists in Texas, Leland, covering this story even as their own homes are being flooded, is a reminder of good reporting in times of crisis can really, really be valuable.
Well, and now that we have all patted ourselves on the back for a minute here, we'll get back to the president. As you write, President Trump slowly creeping back to the front page, if not the headlines. This is your column, Insubordination or Independence. Why top Trump advisors are openly disagreeing with him. That's the headline of the column. In the column, you say Trump has enough confidence that he's given his top deputies an unusual amount of leeway to disagree with him. Viewed in a negative light, you could say Trump's senior aides feel the need to distance themselves from him without fear of consequence. You're talking specifically about Mattis, Tillerson, and Gary Cohn. The question is, which one of those two should we view this in?
Well, that's my take. The president, he could fire them all tomorrow if he wanted to. Donald Trump doesn't actually like firing people as much as the image The Apprentice might make the public believe. But I think that, you know, he is kind of giving them space. He has enough confidence to give them space, particularly in the wake of Charlottesville, to disagree with him somewhat, and if he thinks they're doing a good job, they get continue. But the mainstream media consensus and some of the commentators say this is insubordination, he has to get rid of them, it just shows how weak he is, that he's allowing them to continue. That seems to be the media's take, but my view is the president doesn't have to prove his toughness to anybody, and if he doesn't think they're doing a good job, then he should dump them. But if he thinks James Mattis and Gary Cohn and Rex Tillerson are doing a good job, despite Tillerson saying the president speaks for himself to our colleague Chris Matthews, then he has the right to do that and not, you know, forbid them from ever offering a contrary opinion. Yeah,
incredible interview by Chris Wallace on Sunday, Fox News Sunday, with that moment with Rex Tillerson. The question, though, sort of going forward, though, is he giving them a lot of room because he has to, because he knows firing his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, and his top economic advisor, shall we say, would be practically very difficult and politically extraordinarily harmful? Or is he saying, well, you know, my ego's gotten a little bit thicker, my skin's gotten a little bit tougher over the past couple of months as president, and therefore people criticizing me, that's okay now? Yeah, well, it's interesting the contrast between the president having all those negative tweets against Jeff Sessions, but ultimately allowing him to stay on as Attorney General, and not directly responding to Cohn or Mattis, except perhaps there were these leaked accounts or Tillerson. But, you know, of course, political calculations must factor into this. Were he to decide, okay, I've had it with Rex Tillerson and he's out, and not only would there be a huge firestorm, but then it would take a couple of months at least to find a replacement who could be confirmed by the Senate. So any president has to weigh the cost of firing someone who either thinks is doing a bad job, disagrees with them on policy, or is just plain insubordinate, versus the fallout, political and otherwise, of taking such a drastic action. Your old newspaper, the Washington Post, with a great piece today, sort of inside the West Wing, talking about now how General Kelly has really brought order back into the West Wing, and it has a much different discipline and a much different way of dealing with the president than anyone else has in the past. But in there it said that a number of the president's top advisors were quite upset. A number said that the president was quite upset with a number of his top advisors. And then it got down into the machinations of whether or not the president mentioned Gary Cohn's name during the rally in Phoenix. It had sort of these very esoteric moments. It almost felt like a recitation of complaints at a sorority house about how people didn't treat each other right. Is that really what the American people care about? Are the American people best served by journalists when we get down into those kinds of weeds, into that kind of inside politics?
Well, that degree of palace intrigue is mainly a fascination to, you know, 500 journalists living inside the Beltway and maybe the political class as well. Certainly not average Americans who are a lot more concerned with health care and taxes. But the takeaway from that piece, and I've been waiting for it, is, okay, General Kelly comes in, he imposes a lot more order. How long before we read a piece saying President Trump is frustrated with him? And there is some suggestions in this piece that Trump doesn't enjoy all the order. He liked having old friends be able to stop by the Oval Office, or people pop in and out. He likes being surrounded by people. He's a people person. So it matters only in that the president can obviously overrule his general, John Kelly, and go back to the old system. But most people seem to think that the West Wing management was chaotic enough that this is a better system.
Well, we don't know whether the president read that piece this morning in the Washington Post, but he did tweet, General John Kelly is doing a great job as chief of staff. I could not be happier or more impressed, and this administration continues to get things done at a record clip. So that's the answer.
He read the piece. He read the piece.
Well, that's the interpretation, and the read from Howard Kurtz. A lot more on this on Media Buzz, sir.